coming back from a grueling job site. I found my apartment turned into an absolute frat house. These are my relatives. They're going to live here for a bit. My mother-in-law announced. And you are going to feed all of us. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a fit. I simply walked out onto the balcony. And what they saw me do 5 minutes later made them fly out of my apartment faster than the wind. Maya Vance unclipped her last carabiner. She leaned her back against the warm brick wall, letting out a deep sigh of pure bliss. The 25th floor. Her floor. From here. On her very own balcony. The Chicago skyline stretched out beneath her feet. It was a living, breathing carpet of city lights and busy highways. The wind-up at this altitude ruffled her short, dark hair. It was a perfectly cooling breeze after an exhausting day on the job. This was her sanctuary. Her fortress. She had earned it through years of relentless hard work. Sleepless nights studying blueprints. And high-risk descents down the sheer glass walls of skyscrapers. At 32, Maya was a certified rope access technician, a specialist in high-altitude industrial maintenance. This penthouse-level apartment with its panoramic view was her ultimate trophy. It was the symbol of her independence. Every square foot of this place was soaked in her blood, sweat, and dreams. She stepped inside. The familiar scent of fresh coffee and clean linen greeted her. Kyle, her husband, was already home. He was sitting on the living room sofa, completely absorbed in his laptop. "Hey there, Summit Conqueror." He smiled, not even looking up from his screen. "How was your day?" "Survived it," Maya replied, peeling off her heavy work jacket. "We were sealing joints on a high-rise down in the Loop. I'm dog-tired." Kyle finally pulled his eyes away from the monitor. He walked over and gently wrapped his arms around her shoulders. His touch was always soft, always grounding. He was her quiet harbor after the chaotic storms of her workdays. Kyle was an IT systems administrator at a mid-sized tech firm. He was the complete opposite of her grounded, calm, and predictable. And that was exactly what Maya loved about him. "My mom called," he said softly. Instantly, Maya felt her muscles tense up. This was the one dark cloud in their otherwise sunny marriage. Martha, Kyle's mother, was a woman who seemingly never accepted the fact that her son had grown up and gotten married. "And what did she want?" Maya asked. She tried her hardest to keep her voice perfectly neutral. "Nothing crazy. Just asking how we were doing." Kyle hesitated. He shifted his weight nervously. "She reminded me that my cousin Larry and his family are coming to town next week." Larry was Kyle's cousin from Omaha. Maya had only met him once. At their wedding. He was a loud, obnoxious guy who spent the entire reception telling inappropriate jokes and trying to get the groomsmen blackout drunk. "How long are they staying?" Maya asked, walking into the kitchen. "They said a couple of weeks. They want to look for work in the city. Scope things out. Mom is really stressing out about where they're going to stay. Hotels in Chicago are crazy expensive. And her 2-bedroom condo is way too cramped." Maya froze with her hand on the refrigerator door. She already knew exactly where this conversation was heading. No. Absolutely not. This was her apartment. Her sacred space. She only allowed her closest friends inside. She remembered Martha's last visit entirely too well. Her mother-in-law had practically done a full audit of her closets, ultimately declaring that her daughter-in-law had zero taste. "Kyle, we cannot host 3 people in our apartment for 2 weeks," she said firmly. "We have 1 bedroom. The living room is my home office. Where exactly are we supposed to put them?" "Maybe an air mattress in the living room," he suggested meekly. For Larry and Sarah. And Parker. They're a teenager. He can fit on the sofa. And where am I supposed to work? Where are we going to spend our evenings? Maya could feel the irritation boiling up in her chest. Kyle. This is our home. We are not turning it into a cheap motel. I know. I know. He sighed. But they're family. They need a hand. My mom practically begged me. Maya sat down at the kitchen island and rubbed her temples. Mom begged him. Again. Martha was a master manipulator. A retired middle school administrator. She was used to controlling everything and ordering everyone around. After her husband passed away, she hyper-focused all her leftover energy onto her only son. And even after his wedding, she never loosened her grip. Let's look at other options, Maya offered, trying to find a compromise. Maybe we can rent them a cheap Airbnb for a couple of weeks. Or a hostel. We can help them pay for it. You know my mom will get offended. Kyle shook his head. She'll say we're throwing our own family out on the street while we live in this luxury penthouse. Luxury penthouse. The one that Maya paid for entirely out of her own pocket. She had strapped herself to a 15-year mortgage to afford it. Kyle contributed his share to the household budget. Sûr. But his salary barely covered groceries and utility bills. The heavy financial lifting was entirely on her. She remembered one of her mother-in-law's very first visits to their newly renovated home. Martha had paced through the rooms, clicking her tongue and pursing her lips. Well. Naturally. The 25th floor. A panoramic view. She had drawled, poorly hiding her jealousy. Whose dime are you spending on all this luxury? Up to your eyeballs in debt. I assume. We took out a mortgage. Martha. Maya had replied politely. I work a lot. Work, her mother-in-law scoffed. Swinging around on ropes like a monkey. Is that even a woman's job? Now, my Kyle. He's a different story. He's smart. A real professional. He sits in a clean, warm office. He needs a wife who matches his status. Not some daredevil construction worker. Kyle had just smiled awkwardly and tried to change the subject. He never defended her in front of his mother. He always tried to smooth things over. Which in reality just meant giving in and agreeing with whatever Martha said. I'll talk to your mother myself, Maya said decisively. I'll explain our situation. No. Please don't. Kyle said, his eyes widening in panic. You'll just make it worse. She'll think you hate my family. Let me handle it. I'll try to talk her out of it. Maya highly doubted any good would come of it. But she was too tired to argue. That night, lying in bed, she stared out the massive windows at the glowing city lights. She remembered the first time she saw this place. The realtor had shown her a dozen options. But the second she walked onto this top floor and saw the skyline, her heart stopped. She knew instantly. This was it. This was where she was meant to be happy. And now, that happiness was under threat. On the windowsill in the living room sat her absolute pride and joy. A rare black pearl orchid. Maya had nursed it back to health for nearly a year. She'd paid a small fortune for a nearly dead sprout. Right now, the orchid had pushed out 2 long stems and was getting ready to bloom with velvety, almost pitch-black flowers. Maya frequently talked to the plant like it was a person. To her, this flower was another symbol of victory. Proof that patience and care could work miracles. Suddenly, she felt a spike of anxiety for her orchid. What if Larry's 15-year-old son accidentally knocked it off the windowsill? What if one of the guests decided to water it with leftover soda? The thoughts were irrational and silly. But she couldn't shake them. This apartment. This view. This orchid. It was a world she had built with her own two hands. And the thought of loud, thoughtless strangers invading. It was simply unbearable. Don't worry. Kyle mumbled as he drifted off to sleep. I'll handle it. Everything will be fine. But Maya didn't believe him. She knew this was just the beginning. The upcoming battle for her territory was going to be long and brutal. The following week dragged on in a state of quiet, heavy tension. Maya picked up extra shifts, working twice as hard just to spend less time at home and avoid thinking about the impending invasion. Kyle, for his part, pretended everything was under control. He casually mentioned a few times that he'd spoken to his mom. He claimed she practically agreed to the idea of getting a separate Airbnb for the relatives. But something about his shifty eyes and evasive answers made Maya highly suspicious. She knew her husband too well. He was terrified of upsetting Martha. He was ready to make any concession just to avoid her wrath. On Wednesday evening, Maya walked in from a job site to find her mother-in-law sitting in her entryway. Martha was perched on a padded bench, carefully inspecting the utility bills Maya had left on the console table. Oh. Look who it is. Our little breadwinner is home, Martha said. Not even looking up. I'm looking at your water bill. It's an absolute nightmare. Back in my day, we didn't have all these meters. And nobody went bankrupt. Hello, Martha. Maya greeted her dryly, kicking off her heavy work boots. Did you need something? Just stopped by to check on my boy. Martha finally looked up. Maya could see a poorly hidden look of triumph in the older woman's eyes. I brought him some homemade meatloaf. His favorite. And while I'm here, I wanted to ask for a spare key to your apartment. Maya froze. Here we go. Why do you need our keys? She asked, keeping her voice as steady as possible. Well, honestly, Martha threw her hands up with such fake sincerity that for a second, you might actually believe her good intentions. Family is coming to town. What if you and Kyle need to run out? And I need to let them in and get them settled. Or, what if I need to water your little flower over there? You're always hanging off those ropes of yours. You'll probably forget. She nodded toward the living room, where the black pearl orchid was proudly displaying its first two buds. Internally, Maya was boiling. Get them settled. Water the flower. Martha was intentionally using words designed to disarm her, framing her blatant boundary, stomping, as an act of loving care. We aren't planning on going anywhere. Maya Jutherov. And I take care of my own plants. If we ever need your help, we'll call you. You are so distrusting. Martha whined, playing the victim. I just want to help. Family is supposed to help each other. At that exact moment, Kyle walked out of the bedroom, seeing the tense faces of his wife and his mother. He immediately realized what was happening. Mom, I told you. We're handling this ourselves. He started, but his voice lacked any real authority. Handling what? Exactly. Martha interrupted him, standing up. She's got you completely whipped. So, she won't even let you give your own mother a spare key to your own house. It is not his house. Maya snapped, her patience finally breaking. I bought this apartment. I pay the mortgage. Kyle, did you forget about our prenuptial agreement? It was a low blow. They had implicitly agreed never to bring that document up. Kyle instantly turned pale. Martha, on the other hand, turned beet red. A prenuptial agreement, she hissed. So that's the kind of person you are. Calculated everything from day one. Planning to rob my son, the second things go south, I plan to protect my assets. Maya replied firmly. And clearly. It was a smart move. Mom. And stop it. Kyle intervened, grabbing his mother by the elbow. Let's go to the kitchen. Have some coffee. Maya. Why would you say that? The evening was hopelessly ruined. The three of them sat in the kitchen. Martha gave them the silent treatment. Her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Kyle tried to break the tension with awkward jokes. Maya just drank her tea, realizing that her home was no longer her fortress. After his mother left, Kyle exploded. Could you not have been a little nicer? Why did you have to bring up the prenup? She's not going to sleep for a week now. She's going to think you want to throw me out on the street. And when she demands my keys, so she can move a circus of freeloading relatives into my living room. Is she thinking about my ability to sleep? Maya shot back. Kyle. She is trying to hijack our home. And you are letting her do it. You're exaggerating. She just wants to help. No. Kyle. You're just refusing to see what's right in front of you. They argued for hours. Kyle insisted his mother was lonely and sad, and that they needed to be forgiving. Maya insisted that care should not cross the line into total control and disrespect for personal boundaries. Exhausted, they eventually went to bed, the issue entirely unresolved. The next morning, Kyle approached her looking incredibly guilty. Hey. Maya. I was thinking. Maybe we really should just give my mom a spare key. He quickly backpedaled when he saw her face darken. Just to the bottom lock. Just for emergencies. You know. What if a pipe bursts while we're at work? She lives close by. She could run over and shut off the water. Maya stared at him, at a total loss for words. On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable argument. But she knew it was just an excuse. If she yielded even an inch, Martha would take it as a full surrender. No. She said quietly but firmly. We have a building superintendent. If there's a leak, they'll call emergency maintenance. We are not giving her a key. Kyle pouted. But he didn't argue. He got dressed in silence and left for work without eating breakfast. Left alone, Maya called her best friend and coworker. Chloe. Chloe. Hey. I am officially at war. Maya started, skipping the pleasantries. Chloe, who was also a high-altitude tech, was blunt and pulled no punches. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Finally, she delivered her verdict. Kick them all to the curb. And throw your childish husband out with them. You work like a dog. You literally risk your life on the side of buildings. Just so some boomer and her cousins can turn your living room into a frat house. Hell no. I can't just kick him out. I love him. Maya sighed. You love him. Chloe snorted. Does he love you? A man who loves his wife doesn't let his mother walk all over her like a cheap rug. He would build a brick wall between you and her. And what does your guy do? Oh no. Mommy might get sad. Give me a break. So what do I do? Maya asked in desperation. Hold the line. No keys. No understanding their situation. This is your turf. You set the rules. And you demand they follow them. If your husband doesn't like it, tell him to pack a bag and go sleep at his mommy's house. Trust me. After a week of her breathing down his neck in her tiny condo, he'll come crawling back. The pep talk from Chloe gave Maya a much-needed boost of confidence. She really did need to harden up. That evening, when Kyle came home, she met him with a calm, icy demeanor. We need to establish some ground rules. she said as they sat down for dinner. Rule number 1. Your mother only comes over when she is explicitly invited. And only when we both agree to it. Rule number 2. No spare keys for anyone. Rule number 3. Any decisions regarding this apartment are made by the two of us. Without third-party input. Kyle stared at her in shock. He wasn't used to seeing her this assertive and uncompromising. Is this an ultimatum? He frowned. These are the conditions for keeping our marriage intact. Maya replied. I refuse to live in a state of constant stress. Waiting for the next invasion. You either accept these rules. Or. She didn't finish the sentence. But he understood perfectly. Fine. He said after a long, heavy pause. I agree. I'll talk to my mom and explain everything. Maya wanted to believe him. But deep down, she knew this conversation with Martha wasn't going to end well. And she was right. The very next day, her mother-in-law called her directly. I know exactly what you're doing, Martha said, her voice dripping with ice. You are turning my son against me. Giving him ultimatums. But it's not going to work. He is my blood. And he will always choose his mother over some gold-digging homewrecker. Remember that. The line went dead. Maya sat staring at her phone. Feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. It was a formal declaration of war. And it seemed that in this war, there were no rules of engagement. Following Maya's ultimatum and Martha's unhinged phone call, a suffocating tension settled over the apartment for several days. Kyle walked around looking like a thundercloud. He avoided conversation and spent almost all his free time hiding behind his laptop. Maya knew he was being torn apart. Stuck between his wife and his mother. His phone calls with Martha were noticeably shorter now. And he always took them behind the locked bathroom door. Maya didn't eavesdrop. But she knew perfectly well that Martha hadn't stopped trying to brainwash him. Maya felt like she was walking through a minefield. One wrong step, and the whole thing would blow. On Friday morning, as she was packing her gear for work, her boss called. Maya. Emergency dispatch. Pete said without any greeting. He managed the rope access division. You remember that old chemical plant out in Gary, Indiana? The main smokestack. The steel casing is splitting at the seams. We need you out there right now to inspect it and install temporary structural bands. It's a 3, maybe 4-day job. You're the only one I can send. Everyone else is tied up on scheduled contracts. Maya felt her stomach drop. Leaving town right now, in the absolute peak of a family crisis, meant leaving Kyle alone to face his mother. She could already picture Martha seizing the opportunity the second she found out Maya was out of state. Pete. I can't. She started. I have a family emergency. What emergency? Her boss barked. You are our top tech for high-risk structural issues. This is a code red failure. Every hour counts. If that stack collapses, we are looking at a localized environmental disaster. Pack your bags. The company truck will be out front in an hour. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Maya hung up the phone and slumped into a chair. The universe was playing a sick joke on her. Hintin's a job, which was usually just background noise in their relationship, was now forcing her out the door at the worst possible time. She walked into the bedroom, where Kyle was still sleeping, and gently shook his shoulder. Kyle. Wake up. I have to leave. He blinked his eyes open sleepily. Where emergency dispatch. Gary, Indiana. Might be gone for a few days. The chemical plant has a structural failure. Kyle sat up, trying to process the news. His face cycled through a dozen emotions: surprise, anxiety, and finally, relief. Maya swore she saw a brief flash of joy deep in his eyes. Was he actually glad she was leaving? Glad he wouldn't have to play peacekeeper between her and his mom? "How long will you be gone?" he asked. 3 or 4 days. I don't know for sure. But what about? She hesitated. Your relatives. She finished for him. They're arriving on Sunday. I expect you to keep your promise. Get them on Airbnb. Of course. Of course. He assured her rapidly. Don't worry about it. I'm already looking at listings on Zillow and Airbnb right now. I'll find a nice spot right near my mom's place. He sounded so confident. So genuine. That Maya almost believed him. She quickly packed her duffel bag with her work clothes, tossed in some fresh laundry, and grabbed her thermos. Before leaving, she stopped in front of her orchid. The 2 lowest buds were just beginning to open, promising to show the world their dark, velvety beauty. I'll be back soon, she whispered, gently tracing a glossy leaf. Just wait for me. Kyle walked her to the front door. Be careful up there, he said, pulling her into a hug. Call me when you can. You too, Maya replied, looking him dead in the eyes. Please, Kyle, don't let me down. I won't, he promised firmly. But as she was riding the elevator down to the lobby, her phone buzzed. A text from Kyle. Mom wants you to swing by her place before you leave town. She says she made some meatloaf for the road. Maya let out a bitter laugh. Even now, as she was heading to a highly dangerous job site, her mother-in-law couldn't miss an opportunity to insert herself into the narrative with her damn meatloaf. Tell her I don't have time, she texted back. The job in Indiana turned out to be much worse than they expected. The old smokestack was nearly 500 feet tall, completely rusted out, and riddled with stress fractures. It looked ready to collapse at any moment. Maya and her climbing partner worked essentially non-stop. They inspected every square inch of the concrete and steel, installing stress sensors, and welding temporary metal bands to hold the structure together. Cell service up at that altitude was spotty at best, so she only managed to talk to Kyle in brief, choppy intervals. Late Sunday night. Completely exhausted and covered in a thick layer of industrial soot, they finally rappelled back down to solid ground. Maya called Kyle. How are things? She asked. Did your family get to town? Yeah. They got here this morning, he replied. His voice sounded strange. Tinse. I picked them up at the bus station. Did you get the Airbnb set up? Yeah. Yeah. Of course. He spoke entirely too fast. Everything is handled. They're over at my mom's having dinner right now. They'll check into their rental later tonight. Maya could hear the lie in his voice. Her internal radar, fine-tuned by years of hanging off skyscrapers where intuition literally kept her alive, was screaming red alert. Kyle. Are you lying to me? She asked bluntly. Where is this coming from? He said defensively. I told you. Everything is fine. Why do you sound so suspicious? Because you sound like you're hiding something. I'm just tired. I spent all day driving them around, he mumbled. Anyway, tell me about work. Is it dangerous up there? She told him about the massive cracks in the steel, about the high-speed winds that tossed their suspended platform around like an empty tin can. She wanted him to worry about her. She wanted him to understand the reality of what she was doing. But he barely seemed to be listening. Whoa. Yeah. Your job is definitely not a walk in the park, he said absent-mindedly. Listen, Maya. I gotta run. Mom is calling me to the dinner table. Love you. He hung up, leaving Maya standing in the dirt lot, in total disbelief. Something was incredibly wrong. She could feel it in her bones. But getting to the truth while stuck hundreds of miles away was impossible. Unless she called in backup. Maya dialed Chloe and asked for a bizarre favor. Chloe. Can you drive over to my building? Just check on the apartment. I think Kyle is hiding something. I'm already grabbing my keys. Don't even ask. Chloe replied immediately. I know the address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Chloe called back, just as Maya was securing the final ratchets on her gear bag. Well, bestie. Your gut was right. Chloe said grimly. Your apartment is currently hosting a frat party. Every single light is on. The music is blasting. And there are random dudes smoking on your balcony. Maya almost dropped her phone. Are you sure? 100%. I even took the elevator up to your floor. The front door was propped open. It's an absolute circus in there. Your husband. His psycho mother. And a bunch of random people with Midwest accents. Larry. Maya whispered. Looks like it. Oh. And you want to know the absolute best part. Your black pearl orchid. They moved it off the windowsill. You know what's sitting there right now? A massive, cheap plastic gallon of dill pickles. At that exact moment, something inside Maya finally snapped. Her orchid. Her precious black pearl. They dared to touch her plant. It was the final straw. A cold, sharp, crystal clear fury pierced right through her exhaustion. So, what's the play? Chloe asked over the phone. Want me to call the cops? Tell them there are squatters in the unit. No. Maya replied. Her voice sounded totally alien. Hard as steel. They'll just talk their way out of it. They'll tell the cops the husband let them in. We need to do something else. Something they will remember for the rest of their miserable lives. You got a plan? Chloe asked. Her voice perking up with interest. I have a plan. Maya said firmly. Staring up into the dark sky. But I'm going to need your help. And I'm going to need some extra gear. Maya finished the emergency repairs a full day ahead of schedule. She had worked nearly 24 hours straight with zero sleep. Pete. Yeah, boss. Was ecstatic and promised her a triple bonus. But Maya didn't care about the bonus. She was speeding back to Chicago. Back to her hijacked fortress. With a plan for revenge actively brewing in her mind. A plan worthy of a professional high-altitude rigger. The drive from Indiana back to Chicago felt like an eternity. Maya sat in the passenger seat of the company truck. White-knuckling the door handle. Mentally rehearsing the upcoming conversation with Kyle. The hot, blinding rage that had consumed her at the industrial site had cooled. It was now replaced by a calculated, icy anger. She had zero desire to yell or argue anymore. She was ready for action. Sven, the older company driver, kept shooting her worried glances. Rough job, kid. He finally asked. You look like you're ready to murder somebody. I'm fine. Maya replied curtly. Just exhausted. She closed her eyes. But the mental image immediately burned into her brain, her bright, spacious, minimalist apartment turned into a chaotic flophouse. Loud music. Strangers smoking on her pristine balcony. And above all, a cheap, greasy gallon of pickles sitting exactly where her beloved orchid was supposed to be. Hearing Chloe describe that scene caused her genuine, almost physical pain. This wasn't just a lack of respect. It was a deliberate desecration of her sanctuary. A blatant destruction of the things she loved most. When they reached the city limits, she asked Stan to drop her off at a nearby train station instead of her building. She needed time to prep. First, she called Kyle. "Hey. I'm already back in Chicago," she said in a flat, even tone. "How are things?" A suffocating silence hung on the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was pure panic. "Wait. You said you wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Or the day after. We finished the structural work early," she explained calmly. "So, what's going on at the apartment? Can I come home? Or are your guests still there?" "Guests? Yeah. They're here." He stammered. "Maya. I can explain everything. It was just Mom." She insisted. She said it was just for one single night. And then they just stayed. Maya finished for him. "Kyle. I asked a simple question. Do I have a home to return to? Or should I go book a hotel right now?" "What? No. What are you talking about?" he objected weakly. "Of course you should come home. This is your house. My house. Which is currently being occupied by your squatter relatives." She wanted to say, but she held her tongue. "Fine. I'll be there in an hour." She hung up and immediately dialed Chloe. "The plan is a go. Meet me at my building in 40 minutes. And bring a belay device and a couple of extra locking carabiners." "Copy that, boss," her friend replied cheerfully. They met in a quiet alleyway a block from Maya's high-rise. Chloe had driven her beat-up old Honda Civic. She popped the trunk and pulled out 2 massive canvas duffel bags, packed with climbing gear. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" Chloe asked, handing Maya one of the heavy bags. "Maybe we really should just drag them out by the collar with the police." "No." Maya shook her head. "They need a lesson. A lesson they will never, ever forget. Otherwise, this exact scenario will just play out again in 6 months. Martha needs to learn that she cannot forcefully invade my life without consequences." They took the stairs up to the 25th floor, to avoid the lobby concierge. The gear bags were incredibly heavy. But for 2 professional climbers, it was just another workout. Standing in front of her own door, Maya paused for a second. Even through the heavy wood, she could hear loud voices, obnoxious laughter, and the blaring audio of a sports broadcast. She took a deep breath and firmly pressed the doorbell. Kyle opened the door. Seeing his wife standing there with a massive tactical duffel bag and her fierce friend Chloe standing right behind her, he completely lost his nerve. Where did you come from?" "Work," Maya snapped, pushing past, awed him into the apartment. The reality of the scene was somehow worse than her imagination. The entryway was completely littered with cheap sneakers and oversized duffel bags. In the living room, sitting right on her custom white sofa, which had been covered by a hideous, itchy fleece blanket, was Cousin Larry. He was wearing stretched-out sweatpants and aggressively watching a football game. Next to him, his wife Sarah was cracking sunflower seeds with her teeth and spitting the shells directly onto the hardwood floor. Their teenage son, Parker, was sitting at Maya's home office desk. He was slamming his fingers onto the keyboard of her personal laptop, screaming at a video game. And from the kitchen drifted the booming, authoritative voice of Martha, who was apparently busy micromanaging the preparation of dinner. Not a single one of them even turned their heads when she walked in. "Good evening," Maya said loudly. Larry reluctantly pulled his eyes away from the TV. "Oh. Hey there. The homeowner is back. We're just crashing here for a bit." "I noticed," she replied. her voice dripping with venom. Her eyes immediately darted to the windowsill. The orchid was gone. In its place sat the massive jar of pickles. And right next to it, on the open, spilling container of table salt. The flower itself had been shoved onto the floor behind the window curtains into a dark corner. Maya walked over and carefully picked up the ceramic pot. One of the newly formed buds was completely snapped off. "Who did this?" she asked. Her voice was so dangerously quiet that, in the sudden silence of the room, it cracked like a whip. The relatives awkwardly exchanged glances. "Nobody did anything," Larry muttered. "It probably just fell off on its own. Flowers are weak like that." At that moment, Martha walked out of the kitchen, holding a large soup ladle. "Maya, you're back already," she exclaimed with fake, over-the-top joy. "We're just making dinner. Sarah makes a mean chili. You're going to lick your fingers clean. I don't want chili." Maya jut her off, gently setting the injured orchid down on the coffee table. "I want all of you to leave my apartment. Right now." A stunned silence fell over the room. Martha froze with the ladle in the air. Sarah stopped chewing on her sunflower seeds. Even Parker looked away from his video game. Martha was the first to find her voice. "Are you out of your mind? You're throwing your husband's family out onto the street." "Yes," Maya said firmly. "You had plenty of time before I got back to find another place to stay. You failed to do so. Your time has officially expired." "How dare you?" Martha shrieked. "Kyle, say something. You are the man of this house, Kyle." Who had been hiding in the entryway this entire time, finally stepped forward. "Maya. Kumeon. Don't be so aggressive. There are guests." "No. Kyle." Maya interrupted him. "Guests are people who are invited. People who kick down your door uninvited and behave like a swarm of locusts are called squatters." "Hey. We cleaned this place up," Sarah chimed in, indignantly. "I swept the floors, I dusted." Maya slowly panned her gaze across the room. The sunflower seed shells scattered on the floor. The greasy fingerprints on her white sofa. Her expensive laptop coated in something sticky. "Right," Maya drawled sarcastically. "It seems we have very different definitions of cleanliness." "You disrespectful brat," Martha hissed. "I always knew you were a brat. Song. Do you hear how she is speaking to your mother, Maya? Please. Kyle Bagel." His voice cracking. "Let's not make a huge scene. Let them stay just for tonight. Tomorrow morning, I promise, we will figure it out." Maya looked at her husband, with a long, heavy stare. He had chosen them again. He was still trying to appease his mommy at the direct expense of his wife's comfort and sanity. "Fine," Maya said unexpectedly. Kyle let out a massive sigh of relief. Martha smiled victoriously. "But," Maya continued, "I have one condition." "What condition?" her mother-in-law asked suspiciously. "Since you are staying in my home, you are going to follow my rules." Maya locked eyes with every single person in the room. "And rule number 1 is basic hygiene. Starting right now. Everyone get up. We are doing a deep clean. Sarah, you're on kitchen duty. The stove, the sink, the fridge. I want it spotless. Larry, you are vacuuming and mopping every square inch of this floor. Parker, you are detailing my desk and cleaning every sticky fingerprint off my laptop. Martha." Maya paused for dramatic effect. "You are scrubbing the toilets." The shock on the relatives' faces instantly morphed into outrage. "Who do you think you are? Ordering us around?" Larry yelled. "I am the owner of this apartment. Maya replied deadpan. And if you want to sleep here tonight, you will do exactly what I tell you. Otherwise, the door is right there. Chloe. Make sure they do it right. Chloe, who had been silently watching the entire spectacle, flashed a wicked grin. She stepped in front of the front door and crossed her muscular arms over her chest. She looked like a bouncer at a nightclub. She was not messing around. Under the intense gaze of two professional climbers, and with Kyle completely failing to defend them, the relatives realized they had no choice. Gritting their teeth, they grabbed the cleaning supplies. It was a small, petty victory. Maya had reminded them who the boss was. But she knew this was only a temporary ceasefire. The real battle was still ahead. The rest of the evening devolved into pure theater of the absurd. The relatives, angrily whispering to one another, reluctantly followed Maya's orders. Sarah scrubbed the kitchen stove with such violent aggression, it looked like she was trying to scrub away her own humiliation. Larry loudly groaned every time he shoved the vacuum cleaner across the room, purposely bumping it into the furniture. Parker wiped down the laptop while muttering under his breath about crazy city snobs. But the undisputed star of the show was Martha, armed with a toilet brush and a bottle of bleach. She marched into the bathroom, looking like a deposed queen, being sent to the guillotine. To think that Martha Vance, in my right mind, I am scrubbing a stranger's toilet, she preached, speaking loudly enough so her voice echoed into the hallway. Kyle, I hope you're watching. I hope you see what your horrible wife is putting your own mother through. Kyle stood uselessly in the center of the living room, looking miserable and lost. He tried to help his cousins, but his presence just annoyed them. Get out of the way. You're blocking me. Sarah hissed at him. Dad, let me do it. Parker swatted him away. Maya and Chloe sat outside on the balcony, drinking hot coffee from a thermos and watching the circus unfold through the sliding glass doors. I gotta hand it to you. You're a real military strategist, Chloe said with deep respect. You literally forced the pigs to clean up their own pen. This is just phase 1. Maya replied, tracking the frantic movements of her in-laws. They need to understand that I enforce the rules here. But that doesn't solve the core issue. They are still physically in my house. You really think they're going to pack up and leave after this? Even the mother-in-law? No. Maya shook her head. She is entirely too stubborn to admit defeat. She's going to swallow her pride today, just so she can plot her revenge tomorrow. And the rest of them, they're totally dependent on her. Where she goes, they follow. The forced labor lasted nearly 2 hours. The apartment genuinely sparkled by the end of it. But the atmosphere inside was incredibly toxic. When the cleaning was finally done, the relatives slumped onto the furniture, in total silence, actively avoiding eye contact with Maya. Well, looks like we can finally eat, Maya announced, stepping back inside from the balcony. Sarah, your chili is probably ice cold by now. Heat it up, please. Sarah shot her a look of pure, unfiltered hatred, but silently dragged herself back into the kitchen. Dinner was eaten in absolute, suffocating silence. Everyone shoveled food into their mouths rapidly, as if they suspected Maya had poisoned the chili. As soon as dinner wrapped up, Martha stood up and made a proclamation. We are going to bed. We're exhausted from the road. And from the shorties. They began setting up their sleeping arrangements. Larry and Sarah inflated a cheap air mattress in the middle of the living room. Parker collapsed onto the sofa. Martha turned on her heel and began marching confidently toward the master bedroom. I will be sleeping with Kyle, she announced. She pointed a finger at Maya. You can sleep on the folding cot in the kitchen. This was a brand new escalation. Maya casually stepped in front of the bedroom door, blocking her path. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Martha. This is my husband's and my bedroom. But I am his mother, I have the right to a bed. You have the right to sleep in the living room next to your other relatives. The folding cot is in the utility closet. Kyle, the older woman screeched. Are you going to let her treat me like a stray dog? Kyle, who had been desperately trying to blend into the wallpaper, flinched. Mom. Maya is right. That's our bedroom. Traitor, Martha screamed at the top of her lungs. You traded your own flesh and blood for this. One more insult, and every single one of you will be sleeping in the hallway right this second. Maya warned, her voice dropping to an icy chill. Chloe, be a dear and grab the cot from the closet. Martha was forced to back down. She collapsed onto the squeaky folding cot in the corner of the living room, aggressively turning her back to the room and letting out loud, theatrical sighs. Maya and Kyle walked into their bedroom and shut the door. Are you happy now? Kyle whispered furiously. You completely humiliated my family. You humiliated my mother. I defended my territory. Maya whispered back with equal venom. Your family humiliated me when they broke into my home and tried to establish their own rules. They were going to leave tomorrow morning. No, they weren't. And you know it. Your mother was planning to stay here indefinitely. And she was going to drag the rest of them down with her. You are impossible. He spat, turning his back to her and pulling up the covers. Maya barely slept a wink that night. She lay awake, listening to strangers, coughing, and tossing around in her living room. She listened to the metal springs of Martha's cot squeaking through the drywall. Her beautiful apartment had been turned into a grimy hostel. And the blame rested entirely on her own husband, who couldn't find the spine to stand up to his mommy. By morning, the tension exploded into a full-blown crisis. From the crack of dawn, Martha paced loudly around the apartment, groaning and complaining about the severe back pain she suffered from sleeping on a folding cot. This is what I get, she lamented, projecting her voice toward Larry and Sarah. I raised a wonderful son, and he lets his unhinged wife torture his elderly mother. Kyle looked physically ill. He bounced nervously between his mother, who was glaring at him with pure disappointment, and Maya, who was radiating absolute, terrifying calmness. Mom, please stop. Q bagel her. We already agreed. I'm finding you an Airbnb today. What Airbnb? Martha flared up. I am not going anywhere, this is my son's house, which makes it my house. At that exact moment, Maya walked out of the bedroom. She was already zipped into her heavy-duty canvas work coveralls. I'm leaving, she announced to the room. I have a job site today. I expect this apartment to be entirely empty by the time I get back. We are not going anywhere. Martha screamed at her back. Maya didn't even turn her head. She knew perfectly well that Martha wasn't going to surrender easily, which meant it was time for extreme measures. During her lunch break, Maya called Kyle from the job site. So, did you book the rental? She asked. Maya, listen. We have a situation, he started, his voice dripping with guilt. Mom is refusing to leave. She says she's staying right here. And Larry and Sarah are staying too. They claim they literally have nowhere else to go. I see, Maya said. Her blood ran cold. So you failed to convince them? I tried, I really did. But Mom threw a massive fit. She started clutching her chest and saying her heart was giving out. Like she always does. Maya sighed. Fine. I understand. When Maya returned home that evening, she knew exactly what was waiting for her. The scene hadn't changed. The relatives were lounging comfortably around her living room. And Kyle was looking miserable. Caught in the crossfire. She walked through the front door. Didn't say a single word to anyone. And marched straight past them onto the balcony. Out there. Inside a heavy weatherproof lockbox. She kept her professional climbing gear. Where are you going? Kyle asked suspiciously. Following her outside. Prepping for work. She answered curtly. She started pulling out massive coils of static rope. Her full-body harness. And a rack of heavy steel carabiners. Her movements were terrifyingly precise. She worked in absolute silence. As focused as a surgeon prepping for a bypass. Inside the living room, the relatives went dead silent. They pressed their faces near the glass doors. Watching her with morbid curiosity. What on earth is she doing? Sarah whispered to her husband. She's a psycho. Martha hissed. I warned you all. When everything was prepped, Maya turned to a completely bewildered Kyle. I need you to clear the balcony. This is going to be my drop zone for an emergency descent drill. Ask everyone to step back from the glass for their own safety. What drill? What are you talking about? He stammered. You literally just got off work. It's mandatory proficiency training. High-altitude emergency bailout procedures. She lied without blinking an eye. I'm dropping in 5 minutes. She tossed the heavy rope over the glass railing of the balcony and began securing her belay device to the anchor point. The sight of a woman casually preparing to step off a 25-story balcony had an immediate, paralyzing effect on the relatives. They backed away into the deepest corner of the living room. It was dawning on them. Finally. That Kyle's wife wasn't some office drone they could bully. She was someone whose daily life involved defying death. And she was absolutely not someone to mess with. Maya's actions hit the room like a bomb going off. The family members, who just 30 minutes ago felt like the kings of the castle, were now huddled together in absolute horror. Staring at the woman, strapping herself into a tactical climbing harness. Martha completely forgot about her failing heart and her bad back. She was clutching her chest, soundlessly moving her lips in prayer. Larry and Sarah looked at each other in sheer panic. Parker finally dropped his video game controller and pulled out his iPhone. Morbidly eager to film whatever insane thing was about to happen. Maya. Stop it. Kyle yelled. Lunging toward the balcony door. Are you insane? What the hell are you doing? I told you. Training. She replied evenly. Double-checking the tension on her primary carabiner. I need to drill my emergency bailout technique. Company policy. Right now. In the middle of the night, off our own balcony, he looked like his brain was short-circuiting. When else I work during the day? And yes. Off our balcony. It's the perfect drop. High elevation. Solid anchor points. She spoke with the casual tone of someone discussing what to make for dinner. But it's dangerous, I am a professional. She locked eyes with him. Her gaze was so cold. So terrifyingly confident. That he involuntarily took a step back. Now. Please step away from the railing and turn off the living room lights. The glare on the glass ruins my night vision. Kyle looked helplessly at his mother. Then at his cousins. And then back at his wife. He had no idea what to do. Part of him realized this was a psychological play she was putting on a show to scare them. But the other part of him had watched her pack this exact gear 1,000 times. He knew the stories of her dangling off skyscrapers in gale force winds. Vorher. Hanging from a rope at dizzying heights was just another Tuesday. Turn off the lights. Maya repeated. Her voice turning into a military bark. Larry, realizing things were getting dangerously real, sprinted to the wall switch and slapped it off. The living room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the glowing grid of the Chicago skyline bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maya's silhouette, standing on the very edge of the balcony, against the backdrop of the neon city, looked utterly terrifying and majestic. She swung her legs over the railing and sat on the narrow ledge, her back facing a 250-foot drop. Final warning. Her voice sounded muffled through the glass. Do not approach the window. The room was dead silent, save for Sarah's frantic hyperventilating and the rapid clicking of Parker's iPhone camera. Maya kicked off the ledge. She glided backward into the abyss and vanished into the darkness. "Mom," Kyle screamed, finally snapping out of his trance. He lunged at the sliding glass door, but the handle wouldn't budge. Maya had locked it from the outside before stepping off. He started pounding his fists against the thick glass. "Maya, come back." She jumped. Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth in horror. "You idiot." Larry barked. "She's a climber. She's rappelling down." They all rushed to the glass and pressed their faces against it. Far below, roughly around the 23rd floor, a small, dark figure was slowly lowering itself, illuminated by the ambient glow of the streetlights. Martha let out a strangled gasp and collapsed onto the hardwood floor, while Larry and Sarah frantically tried to fan Martha awake. Kyle tore through his pockets, desperately trying to figure out who to call. The police, the fire department. But what would he even tell them? "Hi. My professional climber wife is using our skyscraper as a jungle gym to terrorize my family." They would lock him in a psych ward. Suddenly, his cell phone started vibrating. It was Maya. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped the phone as he answered. "Where are you?" he screamed into the receiver. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine. I'm currently hanging around the 20th floor." Her remarkably calm voice echoed through the speaker. "Enjoying the view. Actually, from out here, I can see the guy on the 21st floor left his TV on." "Maya, climb back up right now," he begged. "Can't," she replied smoothly. "The balcony door is locked." Plus, that was only the first half of the drill. Now I have to practice my ascending technique. That's going to take me at least 2 hours. 2 hours. He couldn't believe his ears. You're going to dangle on a rope for 2 hours. Give or take. Assuming the wind stays down. Listen, Kyle. I have a favor to ask. Tell your family to start packing. While I'm climbing back up, they should have just enough time to shove their crap into their bags and call an Uber. You're doing this on purpose. Obviously. He could hear the smirk in her voice over the wind. Did you really think I just felt like taking a midnight stroll down the side of our building? I want this apartment totally empty by the time I pull myself over that railing. If I get up there and they are still inside, the drills will continue. Tomorrow night, I think I'll practice swinging from our balcony to the neighbor's balcony. I'm sure the HOA will love the show." The line went dead. Kyle stood frozen in the dark living room, listening to the dial tone. He slowly turned around. He looked at his mother, who had regained consciousness and was sitting on the sofa, clutching her head in terror. He looked at Larry and Sarah, who were staring at him in mute panic. He looked at Parker, who was excitedly rewatching the video of his aunt plunging off a skyscraper. "She said." Kyle started, his voice cracking. "She said you need to pack your bags." What? Martha snapped her head up. We are not going anywhere, this is blackmail. She's bluffing. I really don't think she's bluffing. Aunt Martha, Larry said grimly, staring out the window at the terrifying drop. Your daughter-in-law is a literal psychopath with nerves of steel. We have to do something, Sarah wailed. What if her rope snaps? We'll go to prison for manslaughter, they'll say we drove her to it. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the dark entryway. Everyone jumped out of their skin. It was just Larry's heavy winter coat sliding off a plastic hanger and hitting the floor. But in the highly electrified atmosphere of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. And that gunshot was the starting pistol. Sarah was the first to sprint toward her duffel bags. I am not going to jail because this crazy woman wants to play Spider-Man, she yelled, frantically shoving dirty laundry into a suitcase. Larry. Help me. Larry hesitated for a fraction of a second before scrambling to help his wife. Parker, realizing the party was officially over, started stuffing his laptop cords into his backpack. Only Martha remained sitting, as rigid as a statue. Mom. Kyle walked over to her, his voice pleading. Please. You have to leave. I am not going anywhere. She repeated stubbornly. This is my house. Mom. This is not your house. He finally screamed in absolute desperation. And she is not joking, I know her. If she says she's going to hang out there for 2 hours, she will hang out there for 2 hours. And if you don't leave, she will do something even worse. Is that what you want? You want us on the front page of the Chicago Tribune tomorrow. Mother-in-law drives climber to suicidal stunt. That argument finally pierced through the armor. Martha slowly stood up. Her face was ashen gray. Fine. She spat through gritted teeth. I'll leave. But you. So. You are going to regret letting this psychotic woman run your life. You'll come crawling back to me. The relatives packed in sheer panic, bumping into each other in the dark, dropping items, zipping bags with trembling hands. Larry requested an XL Uber. 30 minutes later, the apartment was completely empty. Kyle was left entirely alone in the center of the living room. The floor was still littered with sunflower seed shells, and the air still smelled faintly of cheap perfume and pure terror. He walked over to the glass doors and looked down into the abyss. A small, dark figure was slowly, methodically inching its way up the static rope. Maya was coming back. She was returning to the castle she had just violently reclaimed. When Maya finally heaved herself over the balcony railing and her boots hit the solid concrete floor, her legs were shaking violently from muscle fatigue. 2 straight hours of ascending a rope at a 25-story elevation was a brutal physical toll, even for a seasoned pro like her. She unclipped her carabiners, stripped off her heavy harness, and pushed through the sliding glass doors into the living room. Kyle was sitting on the sofa, hunched over, holding his head in his hands. The apartment was unnaturally quiet. The suffocating smell of unwanted guests was gone. The TV was off. There were no duffel bags cluttering the floor. The only remaining evidence of the invasion was a forgotten pack of Larry's cigarettes on the table and the scattered sunflower shells. Are they gone? She asked. Her throat was incredibly dry. Kyle slowly lifted his head. He was pale. His eyes held a complex mixture of fear, awe, and deep resentment. They're gone. He nodded. All of them. Good. Maya said, without another word. She walked straight into the bathroom. She stood under the scalding hot shower, washing away the grime of the industrial plant and the sweat of her climb. The water washed away the soot, but it also washed away the sticky, lingering feeling of humiliation, helplessness, and rage. When she finally walked out, wrapped in a thick terry cloth robe, Kyle was still sitting in the exact same spot. On the coffee table in front of him sat 2 steaming mugs of tea. "I made your favorite. The Earl Grey," he said quietly. Maya sat in the armchair opposite him. She picked up the mug, letting the ceramic warm her freezing fingers. They sat in silence for several minutes. The quiet was heavier than any screaming match they had ever had. "You are insane," he finally whispered. "Maybe." She didn't argue. But it worked. What if something went wrong? What if the rope snapped? The rope was fine. She cut him off. "My gear is rated for thousands of pounds. I was fine. I am a professional. Kyle. I know exactly what I am doing. You could have just talked to them." "I tried talking." "You tried talking. It did absolutely nothing. Your mother was completely convinced she was untouchable. She thought she could do whatever she wanted because you are her son. And I am just the outsider who pays the mortgage. I had to physically show her that she was wrong. This is my territory. And I will defend it with my own methods." He fell silent again, staring down into his dark tea. "They think you were trying to kill yourself," he said finally. "Mom is having a meltdown. She says you gave her a nervous breakdown." "Excellent," Maya replied with zero empathy. "Maybe next time she'll think twice before turning my living room into a homeless shelter. That was incredibly cruel. Maya. And kicking me out of my own master bedroom to sleep on a folding cot wasn't cruel. Trashing my things. Ignoring my feelings. Completely dismissing my boundaries. That was normal." She raised her voice. "Did you? Even for one single second over the last few days. Take my side?" "No. You spent the entire time trying to appease them. You bent over backward for your mommy and your freeloading cousins. You let them turn my home into a cheap motel. I didn't know what to do." He yelled in frustration. "Mom was pressuring me. They were complaining. And I." She locked eyes with him. "I am your wife. I asked you for help. I asked you to protect me. And what did you do? You told me. Let's not make a scene." Kyle dropped his gaze. He had no defense. Maya stood up and walked over to the windowsill. She gently picked up the ceramic pot, holding her orchid. The snapped bud hung lifelessly from the stem. "Look at this," she said softly. "This is what you did to my home. You brought them in. And they destroyed something I loved. Just because it was convenient for them. Just because they didn't respect me enough to care." She walked back to her armchair and took a slow sip of her tea. "I want you to leave," she said evenly. Kyle's head snapped up. "What, pack a bag and leave? Go stay with your mom. I think she needs you right now a lot more than I do. She needs someone to blame for her humiliation tonight. And you are perfectly suited for the role." "Maya." "No." He jumped up from the sofa and dropped to his knees right in front of her chair. "Please. Don't kick me out. I get it now. I was wrong. I swear I'll never." "I don't believe you." She shook her head slowly. "You've said that 100 times. The second your mother turns on the waterworks, you will cave. You are incapable of standing up to her. I can," he swore desperately. "For you. For us. I can do it. I don't want to test that theory anymore," she said, sounding incredibly exhausted. "I just want to live in my own house in peace. No screaming. No emotional blackmail. No fighting for my basic right to exist in my own living room." She looked down at him, kneeling on the floor. "And," She felt absolutely nothing but a hollow emptiness. The love that had felt so strong just a few weeks ago had completely evaporated, replaced by deep resentment and disappointment. Please. Kyle. Leave. He slowly got to his feet. His face was wet with tears. Is this over? I don't know. She answered honestly. I need time. I need to be alone. He silently walked into the bedroom. 30 minutes later. He walked out carrying a medium-sized gym bag. I'm going to crash at a buddy's place, he said, staring at the floor. I'll call you. Don't. She asked. When I'm ready to talk. I will call you. When the front door finally clicked shut behind him, Maya sat in the deafening silence for a very long time. She had won. She had successfully defended her fortress. But it was a bitter, hollow victory. She felt entirely drained. Like a soldier walking off a battlefield, having lost something irreplaceable. Maybe not just her husband, but her faith that love could actually conquer everything. Her first morning in the empty apartment was bizarre. Maya woke up to pure silence. It was an unnatural, absolute quiet. No snoring from Kyle. No clattering of him getting ready for work. She lay in bed, staring at the empty right side of the mattress, trying to process her own feelings. Relief. Yes. Absolutely. But underneath that relief was an agonizing void. Like the phantom pain of an amputated limb, Kyle had been a core part of her life for 3 years. And now, that part had been surgically removed. She got out of bed and walked through the rooms. Traces of his hasty exit were everywhere. A forgotten toothbrush by the sink. A couple of dress shirts hanging alone in the closet. His favorite tech conference coffee mug sitting on his desk. Maya methodically gathered all his remaining items and packed them into a large cardboard box. She didn't want visual reminders. She needed to purge the space. Not just physically, but mentally. Being truly alone finally gave her a surge of energy. It felt like breaking a terrible fever. The lingering weakness was suddenly replaced by a desperate urge to move. She initiated a massive deep clean. She threw away every single item that reminded her of Martha and her chaotic visits, the ugly fleece blanket they had thrown over the sofa, the plastic tub of cheap pickles, the tacky dish towels Martha had brought to help out. She shoved all the furniture aside, scrubbed the hardwood floors, and threw open the windows to let the sharp Chicago wind air out every corner. By sunset, the apartment was truly hers again. Bright, sterile, smelling of citrus cleaner, and pure freedom. The only dark spot in her mood was the orchid. The broken bud had completely blackened and shriveled. Maya took a pair of sterilized shears, carefully snipped off the salmon, dead tissue, and placed the ceramic pot back in its rightful spot in the center of the window. It's okay, buddy. We'll bounce back, she whispered, tracing a surviving green leaf. Later that evening, Chloe called. So, how's it going? Batman, she asked cheerfully. The villains are vanquished. The Batcave is secure. Secure. Yes, but I kicked Kyle out. Too. Good. About damn time, her friend stated with zero hesitation. With a protector like that, who needs enemies? Let him go shack up with mommy. He'll figure out what he lost real quick. Do you think he'll try to come back? 100%. The real question is, are you going to let him? That was the million-dollar question. And Maya didn't have the answer. She loved Kyle. But could she ever trust him again? Could she ever be certain that he wouldn't throw her to the wolves the second his mother threw another tantrum? The next few days passed in a blur. Maya buried herself in her work. She took the most dangerous, high-stress rope assignments the company had, working herself to the bone so she wouldn't have the energy to think. Her phone blew up constantly. Kyle called. She sent him to voicemail. Martha called. Maya immediately blocked the number. Even Larry and Sarah sent her text messages, clearly ordered by Martha, demanding she bring Kyle back to the family. On the third day, Martha physically showed up at her front door. Maya saw her through the peephole and didn't even touch the deadbolt. Her mother-in-law leaned on the doorbell for 5 straight minutes, then started pounding her fists against the wood. "Open this door. I know you're in there," Martha shrieked through the hallway. "You home-wrecking brat. You kicked my son out of his own house." Maya calmly put on her noise-canceling headphones, cranked up a rock playlist, and went back to cooking dinner. Half an hour later, realizing she was being totally ignored, Martha finally gave up. She left a nasty, handwritten note full of curses, shoved under the doormat. Maya didn't even read it. She picked it up with 2 fingers and dropped it directly down the trash chute. She knew this was just the calm before the hurricane. Martha was not the type of woman to surrender gracefully. She would be actively hunting for new leverage to regain control over her son, which inherently meant regaining control over Maya's life. Maya needed to prepare for the next wave of attacks. She started by scheduling a consultation with a lawyer Chloe recommended. The attorney unfortunately confirmed her worst fears. "Technically, because you are legally married, your husband has the right to reside in the marital home," the lawyer explained. "Even though you pay the mortgage and the deed is in your name. If you file for divorce, you can argue during the asset division that the apartment is your sole property, since you hold the financial burden. But until a judge signs off on that, he has a legal right to occupy the space. And what if I refuse to let him in? You can try to negotiate a separation agreement." The lawyer paused, choosing his words carefully. "Or you can create an environment that makes him choose not to live there. But that is dancing on the edge of legality." Maya thanked him for his time and walked out of the downtown office deep in thought. She didn't want to create unbearable living conditions. That wasn't her style. But she absolutely could not let Kyle back in, knowing that Martha's toxic shadow would be right behind him. The solution hit her out of nowhere. Saturday morning, she was idly scrolling through Zillow out of sheer boredom, looking at the short-term rental market. And then the light bulb went off. If she couldn't legally lock her husband out of the apartment, maybe she could make him desperately want to leave. She dialed Kyle's number. He picked up on the first ring, clearly staring at his phone, waiting for her. "Maya. Oh my God. I am so glad you called." Kyle." She cut him off. "I want us to meet up and talk." "Yes. Of course. When, where?" "At our place. Tonight at 7. Be there." His voice was so full of desperate hope that Maya almost felt a pang of guilt. Almost. She hung up the phone and immediately went to work. She called 6 of her friends and coworkers, explained the exact situation, and called in some massive favors. Everyone who knew what she had gone through the past week eagerly agreed to play their part. By 7 o'clock that evening, the penthouse was entirely transformed. In the living room, in the exact spot where Larry's air mattress had been, sat 2 massive, tattooed guys from Chloe's rock climbing gym. They were surrounded by heavy chalk bags and climbing ropes, aggressively playing poker and laughing at the top of their lungs. In the kitchen, Chloe and her girlfriend were blasting reggaeton music and cooking something incredibly spicy that filled the whole apartment with pungent smoke. And in the master bedroom, directly on Kyle and Maya's expensive mattress, sat Maya's distant Aunt Valerie from Detroit, accompanied by her 2 toddlers who were currently using the bed as a trampoline and shrieking at deafening volumes. When the doorbell rang precisely at 7:00 p.m., Maya swung the door open with a sweet, glowing smile. "Oh. Hey honey, come on in. We have company." Kyle froze on the welcome mat. His jaw hit the floor. His home, his quiet, minimalist, relaxing sanctuary had been turned into a chaotic, overbooked hostel. What is happening?" he stammered. "Just having some friends and family over," Maya announced brightly. "The guys from the gym have a climbing competition downtown this weekend and hotel prices are insane. So I told them to just crash here." She gestured toward the bedroom. "And Aunt Val came down from Michigan to take the kids to the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. You said it yourself, Kyle." She looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Family is sacred. We have to help each other out. I'm just following your amazing example." Kyle stood in the doorway as if he had been struck by lightning. He slowly scanned the apartment. A week ago, this was his home. Now, it sounded like the seating area at O'Hare Airport during a blizzard. The booming music, the strangers cackling, the kids screaming, the blinding smell of spicy peppers. It was an absolute cacophony of madness. He slowly turned his horrified eyes back to Maya. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, wearing a subtle, vicious smirk. "Guests," he finally choked out. "For how long?" "Well, the climbing bros are here for the week until the tournament ends. Maya chirpet. And Aunt Val wants to take the kids to the Field Museum and the Shed Aquarium. So, probably 2 weeks. 2 weeks." Kyle repeated in horror. "Where is everyone sleeping?" "Oh. We got it all figured out." She waved a hand toward the living room. "The boys are on sleeping pads out here. Chloe and her girl are taking the pull-out couch in the office. And Aunt Val and the toddlers get the master bedroom. It's a king size. They fit perfectly in our bed." Kyle's voice cracked with pure, unadulterated despair. "Then where am I supposed to sleep?" "Well, honestly, I assumed you'd just keep staying at your mom's place," Maya said with a perfectly fake tone of surprise. "Her condo is so cozy. And I'm sure she loves having you there. As for me, I'll just set up a folding cot out on the balcony. The air is crisp. The view is great. Plus, I need to stay in shape." She nodded toward her massive duffel bag of climbing gear, sitting by the door. "I'll just run my rappel drills at night so I don't disturb our guests." Kyle stared at her. In his eyes, a violent war was raging between anger, hurt, and, finally, belated realization. He finally understood. She was feeding him his exact same poison. She was using his own words, family, helping out, sacrifices, and weaponizing them against him. "You are mocking me." "Hey," he said. "Not at all." Maya shrugged casually. "I'm just being the incredibly hospitable wife you wanted me to be. Remember how thrilled you were when your relatives moved in? You told me our house should be full of life. Well, look at it. It's full." At that moment, a sticky 5-year-old boy sprinted out of the master bedroom and crashed directly into Kyle's legs. "Mister, who are you?" the kid asked, looking up with wide eyes. "I live here," Kyle answered, totally thrown off balance. "No, you don't," the boy declared with total authority. "Me and my mom live here. Aunt Maya said her husband ran away to live with his mommy. Kyle shot Maya a look of pure death. Maya just held her hands up defensively. Kids. They say the darndest things. Maya? We need to talk in private. Right now. Kyle ground out through his teeth. Sure thing. Let's step out into the hallway. As you can see, there isn't a single quiet corner in here. They stepped out of the apartment and let the heavy door slam shut behind them, instantly cutting off the noise and chaos. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. Is this just revenge? It's not revenge. It's a practical demonstration. She replied coldly. I needed you to feel, in your own skin, exactly what it's like when your home is turned into a frat house. What it feels like when you can't get 5 minutes of silence. When strangers are using your bathroom and sleeping in your own bed. But these are your friends, those were my family. What difference does it make? They are all third parties invading our space. Except I actually invited my guests. Yours broke in. Kyle slumped against the hallway wall and slid down until he was sitting on the carpet. What do you want from me? Maya, you want me to beg for forgiveness, I want you to grow the hell up. She said. Crouching down, so she was at eye level with him. I want you to realize that when you put a ring on my finger, you created a new family. And the interests of this family have to be your absolute #1 priority. Higher than your mom's temper tantrums. Higher than your cousin's convenience. I get it. He said quietly. I really get it. What do I have to do to make you forgive me? For starters, prove that you actually grew a spine. Call your mother. Right now. Tell her that from this day forward, she is only allowed in our home when she is explicitly invited by both of us. And tell her she is permanently banned from meddling in our marriage. She won't accept that. Then explain it to her, in a way she understands. This is your final exam. Kyle. If you pass, maybe we have a chance. If you fail. She stood back up. Then you really are better off, living with your mommy. She turned around and walked back into the chaotic apartment, leaving him sitting alone in the hallway. He sat out there for a long time, holding his head in his hands. Through the heavy door, Maya could hear him talking on the phone. His voice was erratic, sometimes pleading, sometimes breaking into a yell. It was the most important phone call of his entire life. When he finally knocked and came back inside, he looked utterly exhausted. But there was a new, hard determination in his eyes. I talked to her, he said. She screamed. She cried. She cursed your name. But by the end of it, I think she understood. She promised to back off. We'll see. Maya replied skeptically. And what about your cousins? Did Larry and Sarah find a place? Yeah. Mom put them up in her guest bedroom. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Now she gets to experience the joy of having roommates. Maya nodded. Good. Now. She looked around her loud, crowded apartment. We need to figure out how to evict my guests. Her friends and relatives played their parts to absolute perfection. Once given the signal, they quickly packed up their props, gave warm hugs, and filed out the door, leaving behind only a mild mess and a couple of half-empty bottles of cheap wine. By midnight, the apartment was dead silent again. Maya and Kyle sat at the kitchen island, looking like two generals after a grueling war. Thank you, Kyle suddenly said. For what? For the reality check. It sobered me up real fast. I hope it sticks, she said. And for the first time in weeks, There was a hint of genuine warmth in her voice. She wasn't ready to fully forgive him yet. The wound was too deep. But for the first time, she saw something in him she hadn't seen before, a willingness to actually fight for their marriage. And that gave her hope. After Maya's extreme shock therapy, their marriage slowly began to settle into a new, unfamiliar rhythm. Kyle really did change. He became more attentive, more proactive. He took on a heavier load of the household chores without being asked. But most importantly, he finally learned how to build a wall between himself and his mother. His phone calls with Martha became short, polite, and strictly informational. Her unannounced drop-ins stopped completely. Of course, Martha didn't accept her defeat gracefully. For the first few weeks, she tried to guilt-trip Kyle constantly. She would call him at work, whining about her ungrateful daughter-in-law, and sobbing about the nightmare of living with Larry and Sarah. They ate all my groceries, she wailed over the phone. Sarah is using my expensive face creams. And Larry just lays on my sofa watching sports all day, please. Kyle. Come, get me out of here, Mom. You invited them. Kyle replied, his voice firm but tired. You're the one who said family has to stick together. So, stick together. After a few of those brutal shutdowns, Martha realized her old Jedi mind tricks weren't working anymore. She changed tactics. She went completely dark, stopping all calls and texts, trying to project the image of a wounded, abandoned martyr. Maya watched all of this with cautious optimism. She saw how much the conflict with his mother was hurting Kyle. It was painful for him to sever the umbilical cord. But at the same time, she saw him finally growing into a man who could lead his own household. They started spending more quality time together. They talked late into the night, planned vacations, and slowly rebuilt their dynamic. The old warmth and trust were steadily returning. But the ghost of his betrayal still haunted the apartment. Kyle felt an immense amount of guilt and was constantly trying to buy back her affection. He brought her flowers for no reason. He cooked elaborate dinners. Maya accepted his apologies. But deep down, a core of resentment remained. She couldn't fully erase the memory of his weakness, his willingness to throw her under the bus just to keep his mother quiet. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset over the Chicago skyline, he brought it up again. I know you're still mad at me, he said softly. And you have every right to be. I acted like a total coward. It's in the past. She lied, looking out at the city. No, it's not. He reached over and took her hand. I wake up every single day thinking about how close I came to losing you. And I want to do something to prove to you how sorry I am. You already did. Kyle. You changed. Isn't that enough? No. It's not. He paused, taking a deep breath. I want us to renew our vows. Maya turned to look at him, genuinely surprised. Why? We're already married. Because I want to stand up in front of our friends and God, and swear to you that I will always take your side. That I will protect you from everyone, even my own family. His eyes were glassing over with tears. Maybe if I say it out loud, in front of everyone, you'll finally be able to trust me again. The proposal hit Maya right in the chest. She could see how desperate he was to fix what he had broken. Okay, she said after a long, quiet moment. I'll do it. They scheduled a small vow renewal ceremony for the end of the summer. They didn't want a massive party, just a quiet weekend getaway in New York City with a few close friends. But exactly 1 week before they were supposed to fly out, a phone call shattered their fragile peace. It was Kyle's Aunt Valerie. Maya. Honey. Hi. She started, her voice shaking. Listen. It's about Martha. She's in the hospital. She had a massive heart attack. Maya felt her stomach drop into her shoes. What is it serious? It's bad. She's in the ICU. The doctors said it's touch and go. She was just so stressed about the fight with Kyle. She's been crying for weeks. Her heart just couldn't take it. Maya hung up the phone. A wave of nausea washing over her. The guilt was instant and suffocating. Had she done this? Did her ruthless balcony stunt and her forced isolation push an elderly woman into cardiac arrest? When Kyle heard the news, he dropped everything and sped to the hospital. He didn't come home until 2 a.m. Looking pale and completely destroyed. The doctors said the worst is over. He told her, staring blankly at the wall. But she needs absolute. Total rest. Zero stress. The next few days were a waking nightmare. Kyle bounced between his office and the hospital ward. Maya tried her best to support him. But she felt like a monster. The mental image of her mother-in-law, weak and hooked up to IV drips, haunted her. A week later, Martha was moved out of the ICU and into a regular recovery room. Kyle begged Maya to come visit her. It would mean the world to her. He pleaded. It would show her that we're past the anger. Maya agreed. Even though every fiber of her being dreaded walking into that hospital. Martha was sharing a room with 3 other elderly women. She was lying by the window, looking incredibly frail and pale. When she saw Maya walk in, she managed a weak, trembling smile. Maya. You came. She whispered. How are you feeling? Maya asked awkwardly, setting a basket of fruit on the bedside table. Hanging in there. Martha sighed. She slowly reached out with a cold, shaking hand and grabbed Maya's fingers. Forgive me, sweetheart. For everything. I was a foolish, stubborn old woman. I almost lost my son. And I almost lost you. Tears pricked the corners of Maya's eyes. She saw what looked like genuine, profound regret in the older woman's face. In that sterile room, Maya's icy anger finally began to melt. It's going to be okay, Martha. Maya said softly. Just focus on getting better. When they walked out into the hospital parking lot, Kyle pulled Maya into a crushing hug. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. You have no idea how much that meant to me. Maya felt a massive knot inside her finally untangle. Forgiveness, even forced through trauma, brought them both a wave of relief. It felt like they could finally move on, but it was all a lie. It was just the newest, most diabolical manipulation tactic in Martha's arsenal. Following the hospital visit, the dynamic in the family shifted drastically. The crushing guilt that both Maya and Kyle felt acted like superglue, patching up the cracks in their marriage. Maya constantly beat herself up over her extreme behavior. She convinced herself that her psychotic rappel off the balcony was the trigger that broke her mother-in-law's heart. Kyle blamed himself for failing to manage the conflict before it escalated to a medical emergency. Bonded by this shared trauma, they canceled the trip to New York. Renewing their vows felt inappropriate while his mother was fighting for her life. 2 weeks later, the hospital discharged Martha. She was supposedly incredibly weak, struggling to walk, and requiring round-the-clock supervision. The doctor's orders were strict bed rest, a specialized diet, and zero emotional distress. I'm bringing her to our place, Kyle announced, leaving no room for argument. Just until she gets back on her feet. Larry and Sarah are still squatting at her condo. It's a madhouse over there. She can't recover in that environment. Maya didn't dare say a word against it. How could she deny shelter to an elderly woman who just survived a heart attack and begged for forgiveness on her deathbed? Maya personally helped Kyle convert their home office into a recovery room. They hauled Martha's comfortable orthopedic bed over from her condo and installed blackout curtains. Maya spent hours meal prepping low-sodium, heart-healthy dinners. She organized Martha's pill boxes and made sure she took her meds on a strict schedule. For the first few weeks, Martha was the model patient. Quiet, humble, and endlessly grateful. She spent all day in bed watching soap operas, sighing loudly, and thanking Maya for her mercy. "You are an absolute saint, Maya." Martha would croak when her daughter-in-law brought her lunch on a tray. "I was such an old fool. I never realized how lucky Kyle was." But as the weeks dragged on, and Martha supposedly regained her physical strength, her true colors began bleeding through the act. It started as tiny, passive-aggressive jabs. "Maya, honey, this soup is a little bland." The doctor said, "Low sodium. Not zero flavor." "Sweetheart, could you walk a little lighter on your feet? The thumping gives me terrible migraines." Maya bit her tongue. She chalked it up to the crankiness of a recovering patient. Kyle, watching his wife act as a full-time nurse for his mother, looked at Maya with absolute reverence. He was completely convinced that their family drama was buried forever. The tipping point arrived a month later. Martha was doing significantly better. She was walking around the apartment, unassisted, and even taking short strolls around the block. One Friday, Kyle came home from work practically vibrating with excitement. "Hey, my old college roommate is getting married next weekend in New York City," he announced. "We're invited." "New York?" Maya asked, her eyes lighting up. "But what about your mom? We can't leave her alone." "We'll bring her with us." Kyle smiled. "We'll book a nice suite. We'll take her to Central Park." The doctor said fresh air and a change of scenery would do wonders for her. Maya immediately hated the idea. She desperately needed a weekend alone with her husband. But looking at Kyle's beaming, hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to ruin his excitement. The trip to New York was an unmitigated disaster. From the second they got to O'Hare, everything went wrong. Martha complained, non-stop. The terminal was too drafty. The seats on the plane were too hard. The people next to them were breathing too loudly. She hated the expensive hotel room Kyle booked. And at the actual wedding reception, she sat in the corner with a face so sour, you'd think she was at a funeral. "The music is deafening," she complained to anyone who would listen. "I can literally feel my blood pressure spiking. I think I'm having palpitations." The next day, they tried to salvage the trip by visiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art. After 20 minutes, Martha declared she was exhausted and demanded to be taken back to the hotel. "You kids go have fun," she sighed dramatically, leaning heavily on her cane. "I'll just lay in the dark room." "But Kyle..." She dug her fingernails into his forearm. "Do not turn your phone on silent. If my heart stops, I need you to answer." The rest of the day was ruined. Kyle checked his phone every 3 minutes and called his mom every half hour. They couldn't relax for a single second. That night, back in the hotel suite, with Martha supposedly fast asleep in the adjoining room, Maya finally snapped. "Kyle, I can't take this anymore. We paid thousands of dollars to come to New York. And we're acting like hospice nurses." "Maya, how can you say that?" He snapped back defensively. "She's sick." "She is not sick. She's faking it," Maya whisper yelled. "Are you blind? The exact second we try to have 10 minutes to ourselves. Her blood pressure magically spikes, or her chest hurts. It is a textbook manipulation tactic. You are being incredibly cruel. After everything she's been through. They fought until 2 a.m. Maya realized with a sinking horror that absolutely nothing had changed. Kyle was still totally under his mother's spell. And this heart condition was the ultimate weapon of mass destruction in Martha's arsenal. When they got back to Chicago, Martha showed zero signs of moving back to her condo. She had successfully annexed the home office. Her clothes filled the closet. Framed photos of her dog sat on the desk. The entire apartment smelled faintly of her lavender perfume and rubbing alcohol. She reverted entirely to her old self. The criticizing. The nagging. The relentless micromanaging. Maya. Did you buy Greek yogurt again? You know Kyle hates the texture. Kyle. Why is your collar wrinkled? Does your wife not know how to use an iron? Maya was losing her mind. She was trapped in an impossible hostage situation. You can't kick an elderly heart attack survivor out onto the street. But living with her was mental torture. Maya suggested hiring a professional in-home nurse and moving Martha back to her condo. Kyle acted like she had suggested throwing his mother into a volcano. I am not letting a complete stranger take care of my mother. End of discussion. The explosive finale to the saga came on a random Tuesday. Maya was at work, sitting in her harness, on a lunch break. When her phone rang, it was an unknown number. Hello Maya, it's Sarah. Larry's wife. A nervous, hushed voice came through the speaker. Sarah, did something happen? Something happened. She hesitated. I don't even know how to say this. Look. Larry got a job driving a truck. So we finally saved enough to move out of Martha's condo. We were packing up our stuff. And I was cleaning out the hall closet. And I found a folder. A folder, Martha's medical discharge papers from the hospital. Maya stopped breathing. And what does it say, Maya? The diagnosis is mild arthritis and minor hypertension. High blood pressure. The doctor's recommendations are light physical therapy and maybe a spa weekend. Sarah took a shaky breath. Maya. There is not a single word on these papers about a heart attack. Not one. The sounds of the city traffic below Maya completely faded away. Are you absolutely sure? I'm staring right at it. I took pictures. I'm texting them to you right now. She made the whole thing up. Maya. She faked a heart attack just so she could move into your penthouse. When the photos loaded on Maya's phone, all lingering doubts evaporated. Black and white. Signed by an attending physician. High blood pressure. Joint pain. Zero cardiac events. The white-hot rage that Maya had suppressed for months erupted like a volcano. She climbed down. She drove straight to a FedEx office and printed the medical records in full color. When Kyle got home from work that evening, Maya was sitting at the kitchen island. She didn't say a word. She just slid the printed papers across the granite counter. What's this? He asked. Picking them up. Your mother's actual medical records. The real ones. Kyle read the papers. Then he read them again. He slowly looked up. His face contorting in confusion. But the doctors. The equal. The doctors treated her for a panic attack and high blood pressure. Kyle. The heart attack was a script she wrote herself. She is an Oscar-winning actress. And we are the idiots who bought front-row tickets to her show. Kyle dropped into a bar stool. All the blood drained from his face. The puzzle pieces were violently slamming into place. The perfectly timed heart attack right before their vow renewal. The miraculous recovery, the second she successfully moved into their apartment. The chest pains whenever they tried to be alone. I'm going to talk to her, he whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet rage. No. Maya stood up. I am. She marched straight to the home office and threw the door open without knocking. Martha was lounging in bed, eating grapes and watching a true crime documentary. We need to talk, Maya said, slamming the medical records down onto the bedside table. Martha glanced at the papers. For a split second, genuine, unadulterated panic flashed across her eyes. But she was a veteran of psychological warfare. She quickly arranged her face into a look of innocent confusion. What is this nonsense? That is the proof of your sociopathic lies, Maya said, her voice echoing off the walls. You never had a heart attack. You faked a lethal illness. How dare you? Martha tried to yell, but her voice lacked its usual commanding boom. Oh. Dare. Maya took a step closer, towering over the bed. You weaponized your own health to sabotage my marriage. You manipulated us into letting our guard down, so you could slither your way back into our home and control your son's life. Kyle, Martha screamed, resorting to her oldest trick. Kyle. Come in here. Kyle walked into the room. He didn't even look at his mother. He stared a hole into the floor. I know, Mom, he said quietly. His voice sounded dead. Martha realized the jig was finally, permanently up. She immediately burst into hysterical, hyperventilating tears. I didn't mean to. I was just so terrified of being alone. I knew if I didn't do something, you two would cut me out of your lives forever. I was desperate. We wouldn't have cut you out, Kyle said, finally looking up. His eyes were completely hollow. If you had just acted like a normal mother, instead of a tyrant. But you couldn't do it. Tomorrow morning, Maya said with absolute finality. You are going back to your condo. Larry and Sarah moved out today, so you will have the place all to yourself. And Kyle and I, we are going to figure out how to survive the wreckage you left behind. The next morning, Martha packed her bags in total silence. She looked small, humiliated, and suddenly very old. Her theatrical tears had dried up, leaving behind deep wrinkles and a hollow, defeated stare. Kyle called her an Uber. He carried her bags down to the lobby without saying a single word to her. Maya watched the scene from the living room window. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt exhausted to her very core. When the Uber disappeared into the Chicago traffic, Kyle came back upstairs. He walked into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa. He looked like he had aged a decade overnight. It's over, he whispered, staring at the empty hallway. She's gone. And where do we go from here? Maya asked softly. He sat in silence for a long time. I don't know, he finally admitted, his voice cracking. I feel completely hollowed out. I feel like I got betrayed twice. First by her insane lies, and then by my own pathetic blindness. I let her do this to us. We both made mistakes. Maya sighed, sitting down next to him. I let my guilt blind me to the obvious red flags. And you? You just love her too much. That wasn't love. He shook his head bitterly. That was some kind of sick, toxic dependency. And I have no idea how to cure it. That brutally honest conversation was the beginning of a very long, very difficult road to recovery. Kyle finally realized the depth of his trauma. The very next week, he started seeing a licensed therapist. The sessions were brutal. He had to unpack 30 years of codependency, learn how to spot emotional manipulation, and build rigid, impermeable boundaries. It wasn't a clean process. There were setbacks, depressive episodes, and moments of intense guilt. But Maya stayed by his side through all of it. She had changed. 2. The massive betrayal taught her to trust her own gut above all else. She swore never to let anyone, even someone claiming a medical emergency, violate her boundaries again. She let go of her guilt. She finally understood that her harsh reaction to Martha wasn't cruelty, it was a basic survival instinct. They practically cut off all contact with Martha. Kyle called her exactly once a week for a 5-minute check-in. She always answered with short, clipped sentences, clearly still playing the victim. But she never once attempted to drop by the apartment or offer unsolicited advice. Being completely exposed had stripped her of her power. 6 months later, when their lives had finally stabilized into a healthy, peaceful routine, they followed through on their promise. They renewed their vows. It wasn't in New York. It was a quiet, private ceremony at a small chapel in downtown Chicago. With just the two of them, standing at the altar. They made promises not just to each other, but to themselves. They swore to be brutally honest, to fiercely protect their boundaries, and to prioritize their small, two-person family above the rest of the world. A few weeks later, while cleaning out the utility closet, Maya found her old canvas bag of climbing gear. She pulled out the heavy ropes, the static lines, the tactical harness. Her fingers instinctively checked the tension on the carabiners. "You remember that night?" Kyle asked, leaning against the doorframe with a small smile. "Hard to forget." She laughed. "You looked like an angel of vengeance dropping out of the sky." He chuckled. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For fighting for us. Even when I was too stupid to fight for myself." Maya turned around and looked up into his eyes. The fear and the boyish uncertainty were completely gone. She was looking into the eyes of a grown, confident man who had finally made his choice. "I was fighting for myself," she corrected him gently. "And for my home. You just happened to be an essential part of the floor plan." She knew. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. There would be more fights, more stress, and more challenges ahead. But for the first time, she was absolutely certain that they could survive the storm together. Because they were finally a real family. Not just legally on paper, but in spirit. A family built on trust, boundaries, and, above all, a respect. 2 years passed. Life settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm. Maya still worked as a rope access technician. But she now had the seniority to pick and choose her contracts, turning down the grueling out-of-state emergency jobs. Kyle got poached by a massive tech firm downtown, coming with a significant pay bump and a lot less stress. Therapy had worked wonders. He was confident, decisive, and no longer paralyzed by the thought of upsetting his mother. Martha had essentially faded into the background of their lives. Once Kyle started aggressively shutting down her guilt trips, she got offended and drastically reduced her communication. Kyle still felt occasional pangs of guilt, but his therapist reminded him that the distance was the price of admission for a healthy marriage. He automatically transferred a small allowance to her bank account every month. But their phone calls were strictly business. For Maya's birthday, Kyle surprised her with an envelope. Inside were 2 plane tickets and a guided tour itinerary. 2 weeks in Nepal. Base camp of Mount Everest, he said. beaming. You always wanted to see the real mountains. Not hanging off a rope for a paycheck. Just for the pure joy of it. Maya was speechless. It was the trip of a lifetime. They spent 2 incredible weeks hiking the Himalayas. Staring up at the snow-capped peaks. Completely disconnected from the noise of the city. And it was there, thousands of miles away from Chicago, that they made a decision they had been quietly considering for months. A few weeks after returning to the States, Maya took a test. She was pregnant. It was the happiest moment of their lives. Kyle treated her like royalty. He practically carried her around the apartment, handled all the cooking, and read every parenting book he could get his hands on. They spent their weekends arguing over baby names and picking out cribs. But the looming reality that Martha was going to be a grandmother cast a complicated shadow over the joy. Maya knew they couldn't hide it forever. "Do you want to tell her?" Maya asked him one night. He thought about it for a long time. "I honestly don't know," he admitted. "She is my mother. And this is her grandchild. But I am terrified that bringing her back into our orbit is going to destroy everything we've built." They decided to keep it a secret until the second trimester. But Martha, through the grapevine of extended family gossip, found out on her own. Her reaction was explosive. She called Kyle, screaming so loudly Maya could hear it from across the kitchen. "You hid my own grandchild from me," she shrieked. "Are you trying to erase me from your life completely, Mom?" "Calm down," Kyle said firmly. "We were just waiting until the first trimester was over to make sure everything was healthy. Don't lie to me, this is her doing." Martha screeched. "That psycho climber of yours is brainwashing you. But I won't stand for it. I have grandparents' rights. I will take you to court to see my grandchild." The threat, empty as it was, instantly poisoned the air in the apartment. Maya saw the old anxiety creeping back into Kyle's eyes. "Maybe we should just meet with her," Maya suggested calmly. "Lay down the ground rules before the baby gets here." "Are you sure?" he asked, looking stressed. "Yeah. We can't run from her forever. Let's just nip this in the bud." They agreed to meet Martha on strictly neutral territory, a crowded Panera Bread in the suburbs. Martha marched into the cafe, looking like she was ready for a courtroom brawl. But Maya didn't give her a chance to speak. She took the lead, speaking with absolute, icy corporate authority. "Martha, we would be happy for you to be a part of our child's life. But there are non-negotiable terms. 0 unsolicited parenting advice. 0 unannounced visits to our home. And 0 passive-aggressive comments about me in front of my child. You get to be a grandmother. You get to bring toys and play peekaboo. You do not get an executive vote in our family. If you violate a single one of these rules, your access to your grandchild will be permanently revoked. Do you understand?" Martha was stunned into silence. She had walked in prepared for a screaming match, not a legally binding contract negotiation. She sat there with her lips pursed tightly, staring at the table. Finally, she let out a long breath and gave a stiff nod. "Fine," she muttered. "I understand." A few months later, they welcomed a healthy baby boy. They named him Pete, after Maya's beloved grandfather. Shockingly, Martha actually kept her word. She came over exactly once a week, precisely at the agreed-upon time. She brought expensive baby clothes, cooed over little Pete, and didn't utter a single critique of Maya's apartment or parenting style. It wasn't because she had become a saint. It was because she was terrified. She knew Kyle had the spine to cut her off completely. And she knew this was her absolute last chance to remain relevant in her son's life. Watching her interact with the baby, Maya no longer saw a terrifying Manipulative mastermind. She just saw a lonely, aging woman who had finally learned the hard way that actions have consequences. There was no magical forgiveness in Maya's heart. But there was peace. On baby Pete's first birthday, they hosted a small party at the penthouse. Martha was sitting on the living room rug, holding her grandson and reading him a picture book. Looking genuinely content. Kyle walked up behind Maya, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Look at that," he whispered. "I think we actually pulled it off." Maya looked at her husband, at her giggling son, and at the mother-in-law who had finally been tamed. She smiled. "Yeah," she agreed. "We did." Over on the living room windowsill, basking in the afternoon sun, the black pearl orchid was in full, magnificent bloom. After surviving the trauma, the snapped stems, and the neglect, it had not only recovered, but it had grown 3 new, massive flower clusters. Maya looked at the dark, velvety petals and realized her family was exactly like that plant. They had been dragged through hell, nearly snapped in half. But they survived, they put down stronger roots, and they bloomed more beautifully than before. Life went on, perfectly imperfect. Much like the view from the 25th floor, where the chaotic, blinding lights of the city below seamlessly blended into the infinite quiet dark of the sky above.